Okay, so this is the 2024 vinyl tag. I'm going to get right into it. First question: favorite record you purchased in 2023? Um, there was um, the Scorpions re released all their back, well, not a good chunk of their back catalog. They did really nice remasters, and a bunch of their albums got reissued, and I really like Fly to the Rainbow. I'd never heard this album. It's the Scorpions' second album. It was really cool just because it's like an early version of the Scorpions. The first one without Michael Schenker, the first one with Ulrich Roth, I believe. And they're trying different stuff. It's kind of weird. It's kind of trippy. They haven't really found their sound yet, but I really like it. Sometimes I think the best stuff is when a band is trying to find their sound and trying different things. I thought this was a really cool album. I listened to it a lot. I'm going to quickly mention another album that I scored. I went to the Austin record show this year, the biggest record show in the country, and I got this 2 LP import of this classic John Mayall album. So it sounds great, and it had a bunch of stuff that was on the original release as an import vinyl. Man, I tell you, if you can possibly swing a trip to the Austin Record Convention, it was everything I was hoping it was for. I bought a ridiculous amount. I bought as many records as I could fit in my luggage back to Virginia. But I was there for 2 days, and I got a bunch of really cool records. So, question number two: last record you bought in 2023, New Year's on the 30th of December. I drove through Charlottesville and I hit Plan 9 Records. So the last record I got of the year was this 2 LP compilation of the Mott the Hoople. And I also scored a bunch of records in there and had a really nice classical section. And I got um, almost an entire Sibelius cycle, the Mizell Sibelius cycle of Vienna Phil. Um, Almost the whole thing. Missing Symphony Number 4. That's okay because the fourth is my least favorite of the seven Sibelius symphonies. So those were last records I bought in the year. A band or singer who released two or more albums in the same year. I think this was a pandemic thing. A lot of artists had a lot of time on their hands, a lot of time to go into the studio. 2022, the Red Hot Chili Peppers released two albums: Return of the Dream Canteen and Unlimited Love, I think is what this is called. But yeah, I'm not the biggest Chili Peppers fan in the world, but I somehow heard part of this on a streaming app and I was blown away. I thought they were really good. I bought them both on vinyl, and I thought it was a real return to form. I hadn't really listened to the Chili Peppers much since Californication, but yeah, they dropped two albums in 2022. They're both bangers. A band who, if you could only listen to music from one decade, which would you choose? I'm gonna go with the 70s, and I don't need to beat it to death, but I figured show what is the most quintessential 70s album in my collection. And I'm gonna put in an argument that Physical Graffiti is the quintessential 70s album. And here's why I say that. The decade was sort of like there were two parts to the 70s. There was like hippie music in Prague, and I'm talking mainly about the UK here, and then the big punk reaction to that. And the second half of the decade was all about disco or punk, and the punks were just really disgusted with the excesses of these big hippie bands who could put out garbage that would just sell double platinum no matter what. It took 5 years for Zeppelin to get to the point where they could release some kind of a big bloated behemoth double album like Physical Graffiti, which was loaded with filler and stuff that was left off of other albums. It was big and bloated, and I love Physical Graffiti, but I think it's maybe a little overrated. Um, so yeah, this was exactly what the second half of the decade was, a reaction against albums like Physical Graffiti. So I'm going to argue that this is the quintessential 70s album because it represents so much of what happened in that decade. But gotta say, my favorite decade for music is probably the 70s. For some reason, I am getting this list all mixed up. I know there's a question about the person you listen to, the artist you listen to the most in 2023. I'm sorry, that's question number 6. Um, I'm gonna go with the last couple months of the year. I suddenly, finally clicked with Bruce Springsteen. And the crazy thing was, somehow I heard this album, and this was the one that for some reason just landed with me in a way that other Springsteen albums didn't. And it's, I think, from 2008. It's called Wrecking Ball. This is kind of, if you look at these lists of Springsteen's best albums, this isn't really a very highly regarded album, but I liked it. I liked it a lot. And I think part of why it resonated with me was I've never been crazy about the production on a lot of Springsteen's albums. They kind of suffer from that 80s kind of dry sound, and I just never felt like his stuff was necessarily recorded that well. And this album just sounds great. It's very modern sounding, and it kind of allowed me to really pay attention to the songwriting. And I think that's Bruce's real talent. Is the guy is a fantastic songwriter. This is maybe old news to a lot of you, but for some reason, for decades, it just couldn't get into the box. Couldn't do it. And this album, I listened to it like 3 times in a row. I was like, God damn, this is good. And found myself really listening to some of his later stuff, like The Rising, which is pretty highly regarded. And also checking out some of the older stuff. Checking out some live recordings that, like I said, I thought maybe might sound a little better than some of the big albums from the 80s and thereon. Um, a record or a band or singer from Manchester, England. I'm going with the Buzzcocks. I'm not the biggest punk in the world, but I heard this album for the first time about 3 years ago, and I still don't think I've heard an album in the past 3 years that was better than this Buzzcocks album. This usually isn't the one most people recommend, but I just was blown away by this album. I think it's an absolutely phenomenal album. I'm sorry, its album has a name. It's called A Different Kind of Tension by the Buzzcocks. I think this is like their second or third album. But they are from Manchester, the Buzzcocks. A 7-inch record. I have none, but then I realized I actually do have one because it's the only thing these artists have released, and I wanted to hear it. This is Planet England. It's a project with Andy Partridge and Robin Hitchcock. Only thing they've released is this 7-inch, to my knowledge. So this is probably the only 7-inch in my entire. I don't even know if this considered a 10-inch. I don't know. I think a 7-inch is a single, and I got none of those. But yeah, that's a fantastic release. I don't know if those two are gonna get together again or not. Oh yeah, this question: who's coming to your party? Choose 4 music-related people for an imaginary dinner party, past or present, living or alive. Okay, I gave this one a lot of thought. Here's who I'd like to have at this party. First, Jerry Garcia and Jim Morrison. Why? Because they hated each other, and it would just be so much fun watching these two go at it. I don't know how Morrison felt about Jerry, but Jerry had a very low opinion of Jim. Thought he was a big phony from LA, and it would just be hilarious watching them go after each other. And the best part would be watching Jerry trying to pretend that he's not this big egotistical rock star like Jim, when very much was an egotistical rock star, like all good rock stars. Um, so then, also to liven it up a little bit, we gotta have Ozzy. We gotta have Ozzy. Ozzy would just liven everything up. But I'm gonna say we want like first season of the Osbournes Ozzy. Why? Why do I say that? Because I think we want Ozzy with some. That Ozzy has some wisdom about him, some lived experience. He was somewhat sober by that time. He'd outlived Jerry, and I think he would have had some perspective and some wisdom that he could shed on the situation that these other guys didn't have. But there needs to be a woman there. And I think we need a woman, a really sassy woman that can call these guys on their bullshit and to tell these clowns to stop acting like children. We need someone like that to rein these jokers in. And thought like who would be good for that. Thought about maybe Linda Ronstadt. I adore Linda Ronstadt. She's a very savvy woman. I always enjoy interviews with her. But I think the person that could really just call them on their BS would be Cher. And I don't have any albums by Cher, but I would say this dinner party needs to be rounded out by a very strong woman presence, and I think Cher would be the person for that job. So that would be a very entertaining evening, I think. So we lost them. A musician who passed away in 2023. I'm going to go with Ahmad Jamal, the jazz pianist. I absolutely love Ahmad Jamal. I haven't even broken the seal on this. This was a record store release. For the last couple of years, they've been slowly putting these out on record store days. These are a series of recordings from Seattle in the 60s, live Ahmad on piano. They've done three of these now, and this is the one for 66 to 1968. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to cracking this open. Rest in peace, Ahmad Jamal. One country. If you could only have music from one country, what country would it be? And I'm sorry, it's got to be the UK. For me, it's absolutely the UK. I mean, I got five favorite bands, and my five favorite bands are the Beatles, Sabbath, Floyd, Radiohead, and the Grateful Dead. So four of those are for Britain. And if the Dead dropped off the list, who would follow up behind them? Who's next in line? More Brits: Judas Priest, Jethro Tull, The Who, The Rolling Stones, all Brits. So clearly, in my case, the winner is Britain. So I got to come up with a quintessentially British album. It should be have tea and Union Jacks and all that stuff. And I think a very quintessentially British album would be Quadrophenia by The Who. Just a lot of cultural references, mods and rockers. This confused young man takes a train trip from London to Brighton. I imagine that probably a lot of Americans, when this album first came out, were like, what the hell are these lyrics even about? There's just British slang and all kinds of stuff. The last truly great Who album, Quadrophenia. A record you bought when you were a teenager. Um, this is one of the very first albums I ever bought. I fell in love with Zeppelin. I wanted some Zeppelin. I saved up some money, and I went. I just picked one at random, and I didn't know which ones I was getting, and certainly couldn't have afforded Physical Graffiti. And I picked this one, and at the time, it was the wrong choice. I wanted Zeppelin too. I wanted just lunkhead riffs, loud and distorted guitars, and that was not this album. But like many people in the intervening years, it grew on me, and I now consider this to be one of their finest albums. And I didn't maybe appreciate it at the time, but what's the last song on side one? Out on the Tiles. That's as heavy and mean and ornery as any Zeppelin song. I mean, that is just a heavy, pounding guitar riffs and Bonham just pounding away. So parts of this album are as heavy as anything that you would have wanted to, you could have asked for. So, but yeah, as we all know, this was a big change in direction for the band and the start of their most fruitful period. So yeah, they were trying some different stuff on this album, and they really found their sound in the next two albums. But I was a teenager. I picked one at random, and I picked Zeppelin 3. Show a funk or soul record, and I'm going to show one that is just an amazing album, and I don't know if it ever got a vinyl release or not. This is, I believe, from 2000. It's from 2003. Can't Stop. I Can't Stop by Al Green. So this is like one of those albums that comes out every now and then where maybe a guy's career has been on the skids or whatever, and he gets a new producer and they just like put out this banging comeback album. That's this one. I mean, this is just a banger. I mean, it's just so good. It's just Al Green at his best, but you know, they kind of smartened him up for the 2000s, very modern sounding production and all that stuff. 2003, but don't pass this one up, guys. This is a fantastic album. I Can't Stop by Al Green. Show a record you think everyone has, and then a record you think nobody has. Um, at some point, Abbey Road became Fleetwood Mac rumors. It seems like everybody in the freaking world, like people that know nothing about the Beatles, know this album. I think a lot of it has to do with the album cover. It's just so iconic that everyone knows the album cover. It's just like, does nobody listen to Sgt. Pepper's anymore? I mean, surely nobody listens to the old stuff like Help or Hard Day's Night, which is a pity. But it seems like everybody in the world is suddenly just all about Abbey Road. And then here's one. I'm not going to say that this is like a rare album that nobody's heard of, but when I was at the Austin show, I found out that the first solo album by Ian McCulloch, Mysterio, is apparently pretty rare on vinyl. It was one of those albums that came out in the 90s, and vinyl copies of it are apparently just pretty darn rare. And this guy wanted to just charge me a ridiculous price for Mysterio, and I just wasn't gonna do that. It got a really good CD reissue a couple of years back, which sounds fantastic. Also coupled with his second album, Candleland. Went on Discogs, was able to get one from Europe that didn't cost hardly. It was not. It was like $20, and this guy wanted to charge me over $100 for this. So, if you haven't heard Mysterio, this is during that period after the Bunnymen dynamite album. This album just rocks. I think it's probably better than some Bunnymen albums, to be honest with you. It's this album should be better known than it is. It's just a fantastic album, but apparently really hard to find on vinyl. She's Great, a female artist you bought in 2023. I'm gonna go with Feist, who's great, and she put out an album in 2023. This is it. It's called Multitudes. She had been quiet for a couple of years. I believe she had a child. And so she finally came out with a new album. It's great. It's a change in direction. It's very kind of mellow, a lot of acoustic. But it's not boring. It's a great album. She has returned in fine form. Love me some Feist, and she is back in the game. Favorite video you posted or favorite video you watched in the VC in 2023? I think I watched this video in 20. I don't know. There's one video from the I don't even know if it's considered the vinyl community or not. There was a video by Taste Like Music, a fantastic channel that I have watched obsessively over the years, and they did a great video. They did like a March Madness thing where they tried to find like the worst album that they could of all time. So they did it like a March Madness where you would have like shootouts between like Pink Floyd, Ummagumma, or some kind of like Limp Bizkit album or something like that, and then like maybe Ummagumma would advance to the next round. But I just thought that was a great video, hilarious, and they picked some truly sucky albums. So yeah, man, that was a really cool video. A record you would describe as a '90s classic. It's one of my favorite albums from the '90s, and that would be the only album that we ever got from the band The Laws. This barely made the '90s. It came out in 1990, and I don't know if it would be really be considered a quintessentially '90s album. Like I said, it barely made the '90s at all. And in my opinion, it was like the last really good album until Radiohead came along. I'm not a huge fan of '90s music. I mean, there's some good stuff, obviously, but like a quintessential '90s album would, like, side one would be grunge, and the rest of it would be a mashup between Shania Twain and hip hop. So, but that's one of my favorite albums from the '90s. Absolute classic by The Laws. If you could walk into a cover, if you could actually walk into a cover, well, who wouldn't want to walk into one of these Roger Dean covers from a Yes album, and you could be on the ship with wings that sailed over this planet and just kind of drift off in this haze and outer space, and just, oh, that would be so nice if we could all live in a Yes album cover. It's like a greatest hits, an album that's so familiar that it feels like a greatest hits, and I'm gonna go with, this is one of those albums that's like, it's not a greatest hits, but it's got like all their best known songs, and that of course is Machine Head by Deep Purple. I mean, Deep Purple is just fantastic, and they got so many great songs and so many great albums. But man, all the big hits are all, they're all on Machine Head. I mean, you got Smoke on the Water, Highway Star, Space Truckin'. Um, yeah, just boy, they knocked it out of the park on this album. Although I don't necessarily even think this is their best album, but Machine Head is definitely one of those albums that might as well be a greatest hits. Last question: an album that was released in 1974, and I like me some prog. I like me some '70s prog, and I think a band that is hugely underrated, although apparently they were very popular at the time, is the band Renaissance. And here's their album from 1974, Turn of the Cards. Not even one of their better albums, but still vintage Renaissance. I love this band. Just some really dynamite musicianship, classically influenced, great singer. Yeah, I just can't say too many great things about Renaissance. And I found a couple, I was kind of looking for albums from 1974. Just throw this out here. Uh, Bill Withers, also from 1974, and this absolutely smoking fusion jazz album by Stanley Clarke, the bass player. So these were both from 1974, and many others as well. I'm sure we're gonna hear a lot about 1974 over the next couple of months. So yeah, that's it. That's my vinyl tag for the year. Happy New Year's, everyone. Y'all have a good evening.